Dark clouds loomed over the temple of Ra, their shadows stretching across the golden sands of Egypt. A storm, rare and foreboding, crackled with energy above the sacred halls where the high priest knelt before the great altar. The torches flickered violently as a gust of unnatural wind howled through the chamber. The sacred scarab carvings upon the walls seemed to shimmer as if whispering secrets of an ancient fate. The high priest's hands trembled as he poured a bowl of sacred oils onto the altar. He had felt the disturbance for weeks and energy shifting in the fabric of the world. Now, as thunder roared outside, his vision blurred, and the world around him faded into darkness. A golden light erupted from the altar, engulfing his senses. Within the light, he saw Sacred Scarab, glowing like the sun, descending from the heavens. It spiraled downward, past the pyramids, across the Nile, and toward a small, unknown village. A voice, deep as the river itself, echoed through the high priest's mind. She has been chosen. The kingdom's fate lies in her hands. The vision shattered. The high priest gasped, sweat dripping from his brow. His heart pounded as he scrambled to his feet. He knew what the vision meant. The prophecy, spoken of for centuries, was unfolding. The girl had been chosen, and Egypt's survival now depended on her. Miles away, in a quiet village nestled along the Nile, a young girl named Layla stood by the riverbank, her toes sinking into the cool, damp sand. The evening air was thick with the scent of lotus flowers, and the soft hum of crickets filled the night. She often came here when the world felt too small, dreaming of a life beyond the endless rows of mud brick homes. Tonight, however, something felt different. A strange hush had fallen over the land, as if even nature held its breath. Then she saw it, a flicker of gold against the moonlit sky. A tiny speck, drifting toward her like a falling star. Layla's breath hitched as the golden scarab landed gently on her palm. It pulsed with warmth, its shell shimmering like molten sunbeams. She felt something stir deep within her chest, a connection, a whisper of something ancient and powerful. Her heart pounded as she stared at the creature in disbelief. The village elder's stories echoed in her mind. When the sacred scarab chooses, the gods have spoken. A gust of wind rushed through the village, rattling the palm trees and sending ripples across the Nile's surface. The scarab's golden glow intensified for a moment before fading, as if it had passed something unseen into her. Layla stumbled back, her pulse racing. She didn't know what this meant. She didn't know why this had happened to her. But deep down, she felt it in her bones. Nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The sun rose over Layla's village, casting a golden glow over the simple mud brick homes and the fields of barley swaying in the morning breeze. The river shimmered under the light, carrying whispers of forgotten stories. Layla moved through the narrow streets, her mind heavy with the events of the previous night. The golden scarab had vanished, but its warmth still lingered on her palm, an invisible mark of something she didn't yet understand. She had always felt different from the other village girls. While they dreamed of marriage and tending to their families, Layla's heart yearned for something more: adventure, purpose, a chance to prove she was meant for something greater. But now, standing at the well with her empty water jug, she wasn't so sure. What had the scarab done to her? Why had it chosen her? The morning continued as usual. Mothers bartered for fresh figs in the marketplace. Children ran barefoot through the streets, and the village elders sat beneath a sycamore tree, speaking in hushed voices. But Layla felt out of place, as if she no longer belonged here. Something had changed, and deep down, she knew the gods had set something in motion. Far beyond Layla's village, in the grand palace of Thebes, Despair had taken hold of the kingdom. The Nile, the very lifeblood of Egypt, was shrinking. The riverbanks cracked under the relentless sun, and once fertile lands had turned to dust. Crops withered before they could be harvested, and the cries of hungry children echoed through the city. Pharaoh Amenhotep sat on his throne, his face carved with worry. His kingdom, his people were slipping into ruin, and no offering, no prayer, no ritual had been able to stop it. Beside him, the high priest stood solemnly. He had not spoken of his vision to anyone but the Pharaoh. The prophecy was clear. Only the one chosen by the Sacred Scarab could reverse this devastation. "My Pharaoh," the high priest said softly, bowing low, "we must find the girl." Amenhotep's eyes darkened. "And if she is not ready?" The priest's voice was grave. "Then Egypt will fall." Layla had barely finished her morning chores when the sound of galloping hooves shattered the peace of the village. A cloud of dust rose as a group of royal soldiers thundered through the streets, their bronze armor gleaming under the sun. Villagers froze in fear, clutching their children, whispering prayers to the gods. The Pharaoh's guards never came to small villages unless something was terribly wrong. Layla stepped back as the soldiers halted in the center of the square. The captain, a tall man with a stern expression, unrolled a scroll and spoke with authority. "By order of Pharaoh Amenhotep, we seek the one chosen by the Sacred Scarab." Silence fell over the village. Layla's breath caught in her throat. The captain scanned the crowd. "Who among you has been marked?" The villagers shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. Then, an elderly woman stepped forward, Layla's grandmother. She raised a trembling hand and pointed directly at Layla. "She is the one," the old woman whispered. "The gods have chosen her." Layla's stomach dropped. The soldiers turned to her, their eyes filled with expectation. She wanted to run, to disappear into the safety of her old life. But as she met the captain's gaze, something inside her stirred the same feeling she had when the scarab touched her hand. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew there was no turning back. The journey to Thebes was a blur of shifting sands and pounding hooves. Layla barely spoke as the royal chariot carried her farther from home, her heart heavy with fear and confusion. By the time they reached the palace, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the towering pillars and golden statues. The sheer scale of the palace took her breath away. Ornate carvings of gods lined the great hall, their stone eyes watching her every move. She was led through a series of grand corridors before finally stepping into the throne room. The air was thick with incense, the flickering torches casting eerie patterns on the walls. And there, seated on the golden throne, was Pharaoh Amenhotep. He was younger than she expected, no older than her own father, but the weight of an entire kingdom rested upon his shoulders. His dark eyes studied her carefully, searching for something unseen. Layla bowed deeply, her heart hammering. The Pharaoh's voice was calm, yet laced with urgency. "You are the one the gods have chosen." Layla swallowed hard. I don't understand." The high priest stepped forward, his robes whispering against the marble floor. "The Sacred Scarab does not choose lightly. It has marked you as the only one who can restore balance to Egypt." Layla shook her head. "But I'm just a village girl. I have no power." The Pharaoh's expression hardened. "The Nile is dying. Crops fail. My people suffer. If the gods have chosen you, then you must embrace your destiny." Layla felt her legs weaken. The weight of the Pharaoh's words pressed down on her like an unbearable burden. A moment of silence passed. Then the high priest took a step closer, lowering his voice. "The prophecy speaks of trials, tests that only the chosen one can overcome. You must find the lost essence of the sacred scarab. Only then can Egypt be saved. Layla's breath shuddered. Tests? Trials? She had never fought a battle, never wielded magic, never done anything extraordinary. And yet, the golden scarab had come to her. The Pharaoh watched her closely. "Will you accept this burden?" Layla clenched her fists. Every instinct screamed for her to refuse, to run back to the safety of her village. But something deep within her, the same force that had guided the scarab, whispered otherwise. A kingdom was falling, and she was the only one who could save it. Taking a shaky breath, Layla met the Pharaoh's gaze. "I will do it." A flicker of hope crossed his face. The high priest nodded solemnly. "Then your journey begins at dawn." Layla turned toward the towering doors of the throne room, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Somewhere beyond those walls, a great destiny awaited her, and she had no choice but to face it. The first light of dawn crept over the vast desert as Layla stood at the edge of the palace steps, gazing out at the endless horizon. A leather satchel filled with dried dates, water, and a sacred scroll was slung over her shoulder. Her heart pounded with uncertainty. Before her stood the high priest and a royal guard named Zahir, her only companions for the journey ahead. "The gods have willed this path for you," the high priest said solemnly. "The scarab's lost essence lies beyond the sands, hidden in the sacred temples. Only by reclaiming it will you gain the power to restore Egypt." Layla swallowed hard. "And if I fail?" Zahir, a man with sharp eyes and a hardened demeanor, tightened his grip on his spear. "Then the kingdom will wither, and darkness will consume us all." A heavy silence settled between them. Layla clenched her fists. She had no choice but to press forward. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the sand. Her journey had begun. The heat of the desert was relentless, the sun beating down upon them as they trudged through the dunes. Layla's feet ached, and her throat burned with thirst despite the water she carried. But the worst part was the silence. The vast emptiness of the desert seemed alive, whispering ancient secrets in voices she couldn't understand. Shadows danced at the edge of her vision, shifting with every step. She shivered. "Do you hear that?" Zahir frowned. "Hear what?" Layla hesitated. The whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a phantom wind. Then, out of nowhere, the sand beneath her feet shifted. She gasped as she lost her balance, tumbling into a deep pit. The last thing she heard was Zahir shouting her name. Darkness swallowed her whole. When Layla awoke, she found herself in a dimly lit chamber. Walls of smooth limestone enclosed her, hieroglyphs glowing faintly along the surface. A low rumble filled the space, and suddenly, before her, emerged a massive stone sphinx. Its golden eyes burned with an ancient light. Layla scrambled to her feet as the creature spoke, its voice deep as thunder. "You stand before the gate of trials," it intoned. "Answer my riddle, or be lost in the sands forever." Layla's heart pounded. What is the riddle?" The Sphinx's eyes narrowed. "I have seen the rise and fall of kings, yet I am not alive. I hold the wisdom of the past, yet I do not speak. What am I?" Layla's mind raced. The answer was there, hidden in the depths of her thoughts. Then realization struck. "A scroll," she whispered. "A scroll holds the wisdom of kings, yet it does not speak." The Sphinx was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, it bowed its great head. "You have answered wisely. Proceed, chosen one." A hidden passage opened in the wall, revealing a path forward. Layla exhaled in relief. But deep inside, she knew the trials were far from over. Layla stepped cautiously into the temple's inner chamber. The air was thick with incense and the scent of ancient stone. Strange symbols covered the walls, and torches flickered as if moved by unseen hands. Zahir caught up to her, breathless. "You survived the pit," he said, his voice filled with grudging respect. Layla nodded, barely. Suddenly, the torches dimmed, and a voice whispered from the darkness, "Only the worthy may pass." Before them, shadows twisted and formed into hooded figures. Their eyes glowed like embers, and they blocked the exit with ghostly hands. Layla's pulse raced. "What do they want?" The high priest stepped forward. "They test your heart. Face your fear, or be consumed by it." Layla swallowed hard. The figures loomed closer, their whispers slithering into her mind. "You are weak. You are unworthy. You will fail." "No," Layla whispered. She clenched her fists. "I will not fail." As the words left her lips, the shadows trembled. Their forms wavered then, one by one. They faded into nothing. The path was clear. Layla had passed another test. Beyond the temple's threshold lay a sacred altar. Upon it rested a fragment of gold, pulsing with light. Layla stepped forward, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. The moment her skin touched the fragment, a surge of energy coursed through her. Visions exploded in her mind, images of the Pharaoh's suffering people, of darkness creeping over the land, of an unseen enemy waiting in the shadows. She gasped, stumbling back. The energy crackled through her veins, wild and untamed. "What's happening to me?" she gasped. The high priest placed a hand on her shoulder. "The scarab's essence has recognized you, but you are not yet ready to wield its full power." Layla's breathing was unsteady. She had felt something vast, ancient, and terrifyingly strong, and she didn't know if she could control it. As they left the temple, the air grew cold. The wind howled through the dunes, carrying a voice that did not belong to the gods. "She is coming." Layla stopped in her tracks. "Who is coming?" The high priest's face darkened. "A great enemy. One who does not wish for Egypt to be saved." Layla's stomach twisted. The visions, the trials, the scarab's power, it was all leading to something much bigger than she had imagined. Something darker. Something dangerous. And for the first time, she wondered if she was truly ready. The palace gates loomed ahead as Layla, Zahir, and the high priest rode through the darkened streets of Thebes. But something was wrong. The air was thick with unease, the once bustling marketplace eerily silent. Fires burned in the distance, and people huddled inside their homes, too afraid to emerge. Layla's chest tightened. The kingdom she had set out to save was worse than when she left. As they entered the palace courtyard, soldiers stood tense, gripping their spears as if expecting an attack. Layla barely had time to process the scene before a voice called out, "Seize them!" Layla turned just in time to see the palace guards rushing forward toward her. Before she could react, strong hands grabbed her arms. Zahir drew his sword, but there were too many. Layla struggled, her heart pounding. "What's happening?" she demanded. Gleaming under the torches, the Pharaoh's most trusted advisor, and in his hand, he held the sacred scarab fragment she had retrieved. Layla's blood ran cold. He had betrayed them. The throne room was no longer a place of order. Chaos reigned as soldiers lined the walls, their faces uncertain. Layla and the high priest were forced to their knees before the Pharaoh, whose expression was unreadable. The royal advisor Menka stood beside him, a twisted smile on his lips. "The girl is no savior," Menka said smoothly, holding up the glowing scarab fragment. "She is a deceiver, a child playing with powers she cannot control." Layla's heart pounded. "That's not true." Menka turned to the pharaoh. "My lord, she has returned with only a fraction of the scarab's essence, and yet the kingdom still suffers." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Perhaps she is the reason for our misfortune." Gasps rippled through the room. The pharaoh's jaw clenched, his trust wavering. Layla's hands balled into fists. "I came back to save Egypt," she said desperately. "But there is someone working against you from the shadows. Someone who—" A cruel laugh cut her off. "Yes," Menka sneered. "And that someone is me." Silence fell. Then, before anyone could react, Menka raised his hand, and the air cracked with dark energy. A wave of shadow burst from his palm, knocking Layla and the high priest to the ground. The torches flickered wildly as an unnatural chill filled the air. "I have waited years for this moment," Menka said, his eyes burning with power. "The Nile withers, not because of the gods but because of me." Layla's breath caught. This was the enemy the scarab had warned her about, and he had been standing beside the pharaoh all along. Pain shot through Layla's body as she pushed herself up. Around her, the guards hesitated, uncertain whether to defend their pharaoh or bow to Menka's power. But Layla had no such doubts. The scarab's fragment pulsed in Menka's hand. She could feel its it calling to her. Slowly she rose to her feet, ignoring the ache in her limbs. Menka smirked. "Still standing, little girl." He raised his hand again, dark tendrils forming at his fingertips. Layla closed her eyes. She reached deep within herself, past her fear, past her doubt, and called upon the scarab's essence. A warmth flooded her chest. A golden glow erupted from her hands. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't afraid anymore. Menka's smirk faded. "Impossible." Layla lifted her hand, and the room exploded with light. Menka roared as the golden energy clashed against his dark magic, sending shockwaves through the throne room. The walls trembled, stone crumbling from the force. Layla stood firm, her heart hammering as the power surged through her. She had no training, no experience, but the scarab knew what to do. Menka lunged, his shadows twisting like serpents. Layla dodged, countering with a beam of golden light. Their battle raged across the palace, magic colliding in bursts of fire and smoke. Soldiers scrambled for cover, the pharaoh watching in stunned silence. Layla gritted her teeth. The scarab's power was strong, but so was Menka, and he was not fighting alone. The shadows behind him shifted and figures began to emerge. Dark spirits, their hollow eyes gleaming with malice. Layla's stomach dropped. She was outnumbered. Menka laughed as the spirits circled Layla, their whispers like knives against her skin. "You were never meant to win," he taunted. "The gods abandoned this land long ago." Layla clenched her fists. "You're wrong." She had come too far to fail now. Closing her eyes, she focused on the scarab's energy, let it fill every part of her. The golden light grew brighter, blinding the spirits. Then, with a single breath, she released it. A shockwave of pure energy erupted from her body, sweeping across the throne room. The spirits screamed as they disintegrated into nothingness. Menka staggered back, his power faltering. "No," he growled. "This is not possible." But it was. Layla stepped forward, her hands glowing with divine light. "This ends now." She raised her palm and the scarab's power surged forward, slamming into Menka's chest. A scream tore from his throat as the darkness unraveled, his body consumed by golden fire. His power crumbled, his shadows faded, and then he was gone. The palace fell silent. The battle was over. Layla stood frozen, the golden glow fading from her hands. She felt empty, exhausted, of shock and awe. "You did it," he whispered. Layla swayed, barely able to stand. Zahir rushed forward, catching her before she fell. The high priest stepped forward, bowing deeply. "The prophecy had to pass. The chosen one has saved Egypt." Outside, a distant rumble filled the air. Layla looked toward the palace window-sand, her breath caught. The Nile. It was flowing again. Golden sunlight bathed the riverbanks as water rushed through the parched lands. The people outside cried out in joy, falling to their knees in gratitude. The curse was broken. Egypt was saved. Layla closed her eyes, relief washing over her. She had done it. She had fulfilled her destiny. But at what cost? The golden sun rose over Thebes, its rays glistening on the waters of the Nile. The river, once on the brink of death, now flowed strong and full, nourishing the land once more. Fields that had turned to dust now bloomed with life. Birds soared above the city, their songs filling the air with hope. In the streets, people gathered in celebration. Farmers wept with joy as they touched the fertile soil. Mothers held their children close, whispering prayers of gratitude to the gods. The city, once drowning in despair, now pulsed with new life. At the heart of it all, Layla stood on the palace balcony, gazing at the kingdom she had saved. She still felt the scarab's energy within her, but it was quiet now, at peace. The Pharaoh stepped beside her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You have given Egypt a second chance," he said. Layla bowed her head. "It wasn't just me. The scarab chose this path. I only followed it." The Pharaoh turned to the gathered crowd below and raised his hands. "People of Egypt," his voice rang out, "the darkness has been vanquished. The Nile flows once more, and our land is reborn. This victory, this miracles, because of the one the gods have chosen." The crowd erupted in cheers. Layla's chest tightened. She had never sought recognition. She had only done what had to be done. But as the people chanted her name, she realized something. She was more than just a village girl now. She was the one who had saved them all. Later that evening, as the palace celebrations continued, Layla stood by the great reflecting pool, staring at her own reflection in the water. She had changed. She had left her village as a simple girl, afraid of the path ahead. Now, she was someone else entirely, someone who had faced darkness and survived. Zahir approached, standing beside her. "You saved a kingdom," he said quietly. "Not many can say that." Layla smiled faintly. "And yet, I don't know what comes next." The high priest stepped forward, his eyes filled with wisdom. "Your name will live on in the stars, Layla. Egypt will never forget what you have done." Layla turned back to the water, her reflection shimmering under the moonlight. She had fulfilled the prophecy. The kingdom was safe. And yet, her journey was far from over. For the scarab had chosen her for a reason. And somewhere beyond the horizon, her destiny was still unfolding.